You don't announce exits. You just leave, no farewell post, no dramatic deactivation, no explanation to anyone who noticed, just a gradual quiet withdrawal from a room you were never fully comfortable in anyway. And if you're Gen X and you're over 50, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because you've watched yourself do it. The posts getting less frequent, the profile picture getting older, the scroll happening less, the phone going down more, not because you made a rule about it, because something in you just stopped needing it. That's not an accident, that's not laziness, that's not even a conscious decision most of the time. That is a generation returning to its factory settings, and those settings were installed long before any platform existed to override them. My name is Frank, and today we're talking about why Gen X is disappearing from social media after 50, what those factory settings actually are, where they came from, and why the generation the internet never quite fit is finally, quietly walking back out the door. Let's start with something nobody talks about. Gen X never belonged on social media in the first place. Not because they're technologically behind. Gen X adapted to every technological shift thrown at them. Rotary phones to cell phones, card catalogs to search engines, fax machines to email, VHS to streaming. They didn't resist technology. They absorbed it the way they absorbed everything else, practically, efficiently, without making it their identity. But social media wasn't just a technology, it was a culture, and that culture asked something very specific from its users. It asked them to perform, to document, to share, to present a version of their life for public consumption and then monitor how that version was received. It asked them to measure moments by how they looked to other people rather than how they felt from the inside, and that ask landed directly against everything Gen X was built to be. You grew up in a house where what happened inside stayed inside, not because your family had secrets, because privacy was just how things worked. Your parents didn't post their arguments on the neighborhood bulletin board. They didn't share their salary with the people on their street. They didn't perform their marriage for an audience, or document their grief for strangers, or announce their opinions to everyone they'd ever met simultaneously. They kept things close, and they raised you to do the same. That wasn't a limitation, that was a value, privacy as dignity, your inner life as yours, your relationships as something you protected rather than displayed. And then Facebook showed up in your mid-30s or early 40s and asked you to dismantle all of that, one post at a time, one share at a time, one carefully selected photo that showed everyone how your weekend looked without showing them how your weekend felt. And you did it, for a while, because everyone was doing it, because it was genuinely useful for staying connected to people who had scattered, because the kids were on it, because it was new and novel and felt like something worth participating in. But you were never fully comfortable. There was always a low-level friction between what the platform wanted and what your wiring would allow. Social media runs on external validation, likes, comments, shares. The whole architecture is built around the question of how other people respond to what you put out. The platform rewards you for caring what strangers think. It literally scores your content based on audience reaction. Gen X spent their entire formation learning not to care what strangers thought. Not in an antisocial way, not in a hostile way, in a self-contained way. You built your identity before anyone could rate it. You figured out who you were in empty houses and unsupervised afternoons and through direct contact with consequences that didn't come with an audience. Your sense of self was never crowdsourced. So a platform built entirely on crowdsourcing your self-worth was always going to feel wrong at a frequency you couldn't quite name. You could use it, you could participate in it, but you could never fully merge with it the way younger generations did, because they built their identities on it. You built yours before it existed. Something shifts after 50. The patience for friction gets shorter, not in an angry way, in a clarity way. You start running a very quiet but very efficient internal audit on everything in your life. What serves you, what doesn't, what you do out of habit versus what you actually want, what you kept because you needed it versus what you kept because you never got around to getting rid of it, and social media fails that audit almost immediately. You look at the time it takes, the mental real estate it occupies, the low-level anxiety of posting something and then checking how it landed, the comparison that happens automatically even when you don't want it to, the performance of the highlight reel, the distance between how your life looks on the platform and how your life actually feels when you're inside it. And somewhere in that audit a very Gen X thought surfaces. This isn't worth what it costs. Not dramatically, not with anger, just with the same quiet efficiency you apply to everything else. You assess, you decide, you move on. But there's something deeper going on, and most people miss it. The disappearance from social media after 50 isn't just about the platform being bad or the algorithm being manipulative or the time being wasted. Those things are true, but they're not the real reason. The real reason is that Gen X is in the middle of the most significant identity recalibration of their adult life, and that recalibration has no room for performance. Think about what 50 looks like for a Gen X man. The career is established or changing. The kids are grown or nearly grown. The parents are aging. The marriage has been tested and either strengthened or changed. The body is different. The priorities have shifted. The things that used to feel urgent don't anymore. And the things that actually matter have moved closer to the surface. That's not a crisis. That's an inventory. And the inventory is honest in a way that earlier decades weren't, because you have less time for dishonesty, less patience for maintaining versions of yourself that don't match who you actually are. And social media is almost entirely built on maintaining versions of yourself that don't match who you actually are. You spent the first half of your life building something: career, family, home, stability, the whole structure, and you built it mostly forward-facing, head down, producing, proving, maintaining. After 50, you start turning around, not to go back, to actually see what you built, to stand inside it instead of just managing it from the outside, to be present in your own life instead of perpetually preparing for the next thing. And you cannot be present in your own life and present on social media at the same time. Not really. Because social media pulls your attention outward, constantly, by design. It is an attention extraction machine that monetizes the gap between where you are and where you wish you were. After 50, Gen X stops being willing to pay that toll. The exit feels good, not empty, not lonely, good. Because the version of connection that social media offered was always a thin version. Convenient but shallow, wide but not deep. You had hundreds of connections and somehow still felt like nobody really knew you. You were visible to everyone and seen by almost no one. The connections that replaced the scrolling are different. The phone call that actually happened, the dinner that got scheduled, the conversation that went somewhere real because there was no audience for it, the friendship that got maintained through actual contact instead of mutual observation of each other's highlight reels. Research from the University of Michigan found that people who reduced social media use by just 30 minutes a day reported significant improvements in loneliness, depression, and anxiety within 3 weeks. Not because connection decreased, because the quality of connection increased when the performance layer was removed. Gen X didn't read that study. They just lived it. The way they learn most things, through direct experience, without waiting for anyone to explain it to them. The quiet disappearance from social media after 50 isn't a rejection of connection. It's a return to the kind of connection Gen X actually understands, the kind that happened before everything had an audience, the kind that wasn't scored or ranked or optimized for reach, the kind where you showed up, said what was real, and the relationship either held or it didn't. No performance, no highlight reel, no version of yourself carefully assembled for public consumption, just you. The actual you, the one that existed before any platform asked you to be something more presentable. Gen X is logging off. Not because they failed at social media, because they finally remembered who they were before they logged on. And that person never needed an audience anyway. You don't announce exits, you just leave. And sometimes leaving is the most honest thing you've ever done. I've been covering the psychology behind all of this in a book called Psychology of Gen X. If you want to understand the full wiring behind why your generation thinks and moves and decides the way it does, it's linked in the description below. See you in the next one.